I wanted to start off by saying thank you again to all the people that send in prayers and well wishes for my wife. She's out of the hospital and no more oxygen, no more antibiotics. She's really turned a corner, doing much, much better. And we do have a flurry of post hospitalization doctor visits to deal with all of her various doctors, of which there are many. But she's doing much better, and again, I can't begin to tell you how much it meant to us to see those messages come in. I would show those or read them to my wife. And, you know, in this day and age with a lot of the negative stuff that happens and has been happening recently in our world, it was so refreshing to see these messages come in from people that, you know, you see me on YouTube. I really don't get to see everyone else. You know, I get messages from you from time to time, some more regularly than others. But the only really way I know you is through those messages or comments that you leave. And for people to take the time to send in a prayer or a message of wishing her quick recovery or healing, it really meant a lot to us. And it was so wonderful to see those messages and to, you know, we really felt the love that was coming from those messages. And I just wanted to say thank you to everybody that did that. So, moving on, you know, these days, as you can imagine, the amount of time I get to go out and take pictures and stuff is a bit restricted. And that's just, you know, the way things are. But I think everyone runs into that from time to time. Either you're just not feeling real inspired or you just don't have much time, but you want to get out and, you know, for me, it's getting out and maybe getting in nature a little bit or just getting away from everything, you know, me and of course the dogs, and, you know, just to kind of get my head out of everything else and do something creative really is I don't know, it's really helpful to me or healthy for me. But, you know, sometimes I do run into times when I just can't really think of what I'm going to photograph or what I'm going to do. And so one of the things that I like to do when I come into those kind of situations is, you know, the word photography literally means drawing with light. And so sometimes I find it really interesting to not make the light something that enhances or, you know, is a part of the photograph, but actually make it a key player or even the subject in the photograph, the light itself. And I think doing this really opens up some opportunities for some interesting pictures. So I want to kind of show you some different pictures. We'll talk a little bit about them and give you some examples, and I hope this will get some creative juices flowing for you, and maybe it'll be helpful. So the first thing I want to talk about is a couple of images where the light is literally the subject of the image. And of course, the most obvious of those are sunrises and sunsets. And so, you know, when we look at sunrises, I love sunrises. You know, in the wintertime, you don't have to get up that early. In the summertime, you really kind of get up really pretty early here in Oklahoma to photograph a sunrise because it comes pretty early in the summertime. But I just love sunrises. There's a peacefulness and a calm to the day at that point that it's just really enjoyable to go out and photograph them. There's almost nobody around. Very few people are crazy enough to get up and watch the sunrise. But you really get some unique lighting. The clouds are usually different than what you get in the evening because the air's cooler and the day hadn't heated up yet. So you really, sunrises and sunsets definitely look different. And I just love the way sunrises look. And so those are obviously one of my favorite subjects. The next being, of course, sunsets. I love the warmth of light you get from sunsets. If you've got a long telephoto lens, you can get those big fireball sunsets. But I also use even extreme wide angles or fisheyes sometimes to do sunsets. Everything in between. Doesn't really matter what lens you have. You can do something pretty creative with a sunset or a sunrise. And so those are great images to, get out and capture, especially when there's some interesting clouds moving around and you can get some really great color and interplay from the clouds with interacting with the sun. The other one, and I really don't do this very often. I mean, it doesn't happen very often, but I haven't really attempted to try to catch them maybe as often as I should, is when you get those little holes in the clouds. It's kind of stormy, or the clouds are kind of moving around, the wind is pushing them around, and there's holes breaking in the clouds, and suddenly the sun just kind of bursts through the clouds. When you have a chance to capture something like that, I think it's really cool to capture. Those are just kind of unique moments. So look for those moments where you can make the light literally the subject. Now, the next thing I want to talk about is where the light is not the main subject of the image, but is a key player in it. In other words, it really defines the image in a very significant way. So one of the first ones are where you get like shafts of light coming through the trees, or, maybe between buildings. If it's a little bit foggy out, you can really see those shafts of light, again, early in the morning. Often, if it's a little foggy and the sun's breaking through the trees, you can get some really beautiful images. Another one is reflected light. I love reflected light because it creates a type of lighting that you just can't really get any other way. And so, I usually go downtown, and we've got a bunch of buildings that are, glass and almost look like mirrors. And they when the sun is, early in the morning when the sun's low, they reflect light on other buildings, and you get some really interesting and dramatic light. And so look for times when light is reflected off something else that creates some unique lighting. The other thing I look for is places where there's interplay between light and shadow. And I really love when, like if I'm out in the woods, the shadows from the trees. And of course, in a lot of these cases, you get the best shadows when the sun is low, either in the morning or in the evening. But, it might just be the shadow of a tree limb on something, or I love finding where shadows are cast onto the sides of buildings and other things like that. You can get some really interesting images that way. So look for the interplay of light and shadow. The next thing are silhouettes. Now, the silhouettes are one of my favorites. I don't do them nearly as often as I should probably. This first one of this little power station, it was behind the place I worked, and it was just drab and ugly and not really something you take a picture of. But when you put the early morning sun behind it, and you have the warmth of the sun coming up and some bluish sky, and the silhouette of that power station, makes for a really interesting image. And all of a sudden this junky piece of industrial ugliness that sits behind our building turns into something unique. So silhouettes can really be pretty cool. Another one I've got here is, this is actually a picture of the cover of a school newspaper I did in 1973 when I was in high school. It was Christmas time. We found a church that had some really pretty stained glass windows, and we put this girl with long, kind of wavy hair in front of it. And we shot this as a silhouette. Now, obviously, it was shot in black and white. When they printed the newspaper, it was done in red because it was Christmas. I looked for the negative for this image. I do have it somewhere. Unfortunately, my negatives from 1973 are not that well organized. But the image, I think, is kind of worth seeing, even though it's just a picture of this newspaper cover. You can actually even see the crease across the front of it where I had it folded up. But the silhouette like that is really, those kind of silhouettes are really easy to do because you're metering for the light, not the subject. And so, anytime you can put the light behind your subject, meter for the light instead of the subject, you're going to turn it dark. It's really easy with digital cameras because you can see the results and you can adjust exposure as need be. But silhouettes can make some really powerful images. They can evoke a lot of emotion and are really definitely worth pursuing. Another one is when you have light breaking around the edge of something. Might be a building, it might be through the trees, it might, just where the sun is, not necessarily the main subject of the image, but the way it breaks and then sprays light into the image can be really pretty. If you've never done pinhole photography, this is an effect that you get with pinhole that's kind of unique to pinhole photography. Is the light, when it just breaks around the sun, when it breaks around the edge of something, will create this spray of light that is really unique. And it's maybe there's some way to get that to happen with a regular lens, but with pinhole, it really is dramatic if you get it just right. You can get these effects in a lot of different ways, but I think that if you'll take the time to look for places, scenes where you can actually use the interplay of light and shadow, or the reflected light, or somewhere where the light is a key player in defining the image. I think it makes for some really interesting images. Gives you sometimes a subject that you wouldn't photograph, or maybe isn't that cool, can be made into something really unique by doing some of these things. Anyway, I hope some of that was helpful. If you have any thoughts or questions, please don't hesitate to leave me a comment. I always love hearing from you. Again, thank you for all the messages from my wife. She's doing much better. And as always, thanks for watching.